Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Bree Bernwanger. I'm a senior staff attorney at the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights of the San Francisco Bay Area, and I'll be hosting this morning's press conference. Each speaker will speak for about 2 minutes. At the end, we'll open up the chat feature so that you can submit your questions. We ask that you submit your questions to Francisco Ugarte in the chat box and include your name and your press outlet. We'll also be sending out a press release at the end of this press conference that will have more details and the names of all of the speakers, so you don't need to worry about spelling. I'm here and proud to be joined today by members of our legal coalition, which includes the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights of the San Francisco Bay Area, the San Francisco Public Defender's Office, the ACLU Foundations of Northern and Southern California, Lakin and Wille LLP, and Cooley LLP, as well as medical professionals, an individual who was recently detained in the Mesa Verde Detention Center, and a family member of someone who was recently released from the Yuba County Jail. Normally, we would hold a press conference like this in front of a courthouse, but these are not normal times. We on this call have the ability to shelter in place to protect ourselves and our communities. When we do venture outside, we join in a communal effort to maintain a physical distance of 6 feet from others, which we now all know is called social distancing. Public health experts tell us that these preventative measures are the only way to protect ourselves from COVID-19. The men and women detained by ICE in the Mesa Verde Detention Center and the Yuba County Jail face the same deadly pandemic that we do, but they do not have the option of avoiding contact with others or practicing social distancing. Instead, they are trapped in conditions of confinement that create a high risk of a serious and potentially deadly outbreak. In Mesa Verde, men and women have peacefully protested these conditions of confinement with a hunger strike. ICE's private prison contractor there has responded by threatening to cut off protesters' access to the commissary. In the context of COVID-19, this is particularly draconian. It is where detained men and women buy extra soap. This morning, we are announcing a class action lawsuit on behalf of the men and women detained by ICE in the Mesa Verde Detention Center and the Yuba County Jail. The lawsuit, Cepeda Ruiz v. Jennings, asks the federal court to order ICE to immediately begin releasing our clients because their continued detention puts them at a risk that is dangerous and violates their constitutional rights. The lawsuit also seeks to vindicate the First Amendment rights of those protesting the conditions of their confinement in Mesa Verde. Our first speaker today is Charles Joseph, who recently was released from immigration detention at the Mesa Verde Detention Center in Bakersfield, California. He's going to talk about the conditions in ICE detention, how they've changed throughout the past month, and about the ongoing hunger strike at the facility. It's an absolute pleasure, Charles, to turn over the mic to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Bree. I appreciate you. Bula to all. My name is Charles Joseph. I was recently released from ICE detention. I was held in a for-profit prison called Mesa Verde Detention Facility. I was in Dorm C with my brothers of many nations. We united to stand up for ourselves, our families, and our future. We are fathers, husbands, sons, brothers, and even grandfathers to American citizens. We are breadwinners, teachers, nurturers, and so much more. We fight this system days, months, and years to be reunited with our loved ones. This pandemic has caused us not to be quiet anymore because our detention for a civil matter may be a death sentence. We have pleaded with ICE to take preventative measures, but they refuse to listen. They continue to fill the dorms to capacity with people who could be carriers. There are 100 bunks in one room with not much space for social distancing. Staff walk in and out of the dorms without masks or gloves. We are crammed into a chow hall that doesn't have sufficient tables or chairs. All the dorms eat in the same chow hall, which is a which is bad for containment. ICE talks about having preventative measures in place, but they don't even give us access to hand sanitizers or even extending timers on duration of water so that we can wash our hands without recontaminating them by continuously pushing on the top of the faucet. There's so many things that they have not changed anything. So we did a sit-in, we did a hunger strike, and they did threaten to take away canteen. So the guys went back to eating, and nothing is done. You know, they have not implemented anything. No masks, no soaps, no. It's horrible. They showed complete recklessness and just disregard for our humanity. You know, and we will continue to speak out, and I will continue to speak out for myself and my brothers still in there. You know. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. Our next speaker is Guadalupe Medina, the daughter of Salomón Medina Calderón, who was formerly detained by ICE at Yuba County Jail and recently released due to the threat of COVID-19. She will speak about the stress and worry she had for her father and the lack of information from ICE. Guadalupe?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for this great opportunity. My name is Guadalupe Medina. I am an English high school teacher, and I'm also an advocate for the immigrant community. My experience with my father was very real and unforgettable, but at the same time full of hopeless times where we found ourselves not able to help my father directly. But thanks to all these organizations, now my father has been released, and we're very, very, very grateful for that. During his stay at Yuba County Jail, he experienced horrible things. His condition, he has several medical conditions which puts him at high risk. Therefore, the inadequate living situation in Yuba County really exposed them to being contracted with COVID-19, also not being given the attention to medical attention was not provided for him on a regular basis or at all at times. And as a family, we were always very worried and very stressed because we couldn't do anything to help them. Also, the lack of communication in there was not on a daily basis provided. It was very difficult for him to even get in contact with us. And every day we wonder, would this be the last day that we will speak with my father? We know that COVID-19 is a deadly virus. And, you know, it's just so inhumane to have all these detainees there held against their, against their will. And I believe that, we need to continue to fight for them. And on behalf of my father and myself, it's really important that we seek release of the other detainees who are being vulnerable and are being held there. And we know that COVID-19 has measures put in place to keep social distancing and washing our hands. As I recall, my father will tell me that there was not sufficient hand soap there being provided. They would all be held together, eating together at the same place, sleeping next to each other. So the 6 feet distance was not real, and it was impossible. So, after having him experience all this, he's with trauma because the conditions were just terrible for everyone, and he still continues to advocate for his inmates in there, for his fellow dorm mates, that he actually slept next to each other and he heard stories about them. So he created a personal bond with them, and he actually speaks to a few of them over the phone and with the families as well. And he continues to assure them that he will continue to fight for them, advocate for them, and soon, hopefully, that they will be all released and be with their families again, where they're supposed to be, so they could take care of them. And in general, all the ones that are detained, they're even with high risk medical conditions, or just in general, we're all very vulnerable. So I believe that everybody should be released soon.
Thank you, Guadalupe.
You're welcome.
Our next speaker is Dr. Nick Nelson, Medical Director of Highland Hospital Human Rights Clinic. Dr. Nelson will talk about why the conditions are so dangerous for our clients in detention.
Hi, so I'm an internal medicine doctor and I run the Human Rights Clinic at Highland Hospital, where we see people who are seeking asylum and examine them for evidence of torture and other human rights abuses. And in that capacity, I've been to Mesa Verde a number of times to see people who are detained there and who are seeking asylum. And I've seen the inside of the place and how the procedures work. And just to compare and contrast, I am currently working on the inpatient ward service in a hospital that was built 3 years ago. And we are having to figure out how to use space creatively and imposing special systems to try to maintain social distancing in a building that was just built 3 years ago and is designed to be a hospital. Mesa Verde is a cinder block detention center that was not built with any of these considerations in mind. The hallways are 4 feet wide. The conference rooms where I've interviewed people are small and minimally ventilated. You have to go, everywhere you go, you have to go with somebody. The areas where people actually live, as we've already heard, are extremely crowded. And we already know that this is a disease that is extremely infectious and can infect people before they have symptoms. And that some people who are contagious are completely asymptomatic. Even one person who can spread this virus in an overcrowded situation like that is going to infect an extraordinary number of people. And this is a disease that's at least 10 times as dangerous as seasonal flu in terms of mortality, and it's already killed tens of thousands of Americans. So I think the question, the real question that we have to ask ourselves is it acceptable that a condition of detention is that you're at a vastly higher risk of dying from an infectious pandemic? We wouldn't allow that increased level of risk in any other area of safety, whether it was like the electrical system in the building or whether they use smoke detectors or any other context. And I think it's the risk is very real. It's a matter of time before there's a deadly outbreak in a situation like this, and the only justifiable thing is to isolate people in their homes to keep them safe in the same way that we're doing for everybody else.
Thank you, Dr. Nelson. Our next speaker is Barbara Garcia, former director of the San Francisco Department of Public Health. Director Garcia will talk about why the dangerous conditions for our clients in detention are also dangerous for the broader public.
Yes, good morning. Dr. Nelson talked a lot about the issues of what happens within those facilities. But as we know that COVID-19, there is no one is immune. And the fact that for over 30 years, I've implemented and supervised medical and behavior services for congregate living programs in disaster shelters and permanent shelters, jails, skilled nursing facilities, and treatment programs. And one of my major responsibilities was the physical building, the bricks and mortar, the layout of the building to ensure that communicable disease could not be transmitted. This virus is a game changer to all of these types of facilities. Regulations on the physical requirements for these facilities will have to change. And most recently, you've probably read the high infection and death rates of those in convalescent homes and skilled nursing facilities and shelters. Many times it's the staff that's bringing in the virus, especially in locked facilities. Staff infect other staff, their families, and those that are locked in these facilities. I believe that no longer we can have facilities with large number of people in them. We can no longer have people in crowded conditions with no 24-hour medical oversight and no vaccine. Those that are detained in ICE facilities today are in danger of sickness and death. The staff that are working at these facilities also are in danger for themselves and their communities. And so these facilities are so dangerous and deadly simply because they're built for hundreds of people with no walls between them, no isolation ability, and insufficient medical oversight. then that in itself makes them a public health emergency, and people should not be allowed to work in them or stay in them. And so it's so important to close these facilities and put these people in isolated areas, in homes, in hotels, and whatever types of areas they can be put in if they are homeless or they have limited family access. The more that we keep these facilities open, the staff will continue to spread this disease in the community. I think it's so important to close these ICE facilities and give these individuals the rights to be able to be safe and healthy. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Our next speaker is Emmy McLean, Deputy Public Defender at the San Francisco Public Defender's Office. You've heard from Charles and from Guadalupe speaking about her father's experience about the conditions of detention in Mesa Verde and Yuba. Both were released about a week ago. And Emmy will talk about what advocates have been hearing from clients who remain detained and why this reflects a pattern of neglect by ICE.
Thank you, and it's an honor to be here with this phenomenal group of people who've been involved in the litigation, who've been fighting from the inside, and who have been fighting within the public health institutions and medical institutions as we all fight back against COVID-19. While the phrase social distancing may have been foreign to us in December, it's now known to everyone everywhere. Yet social distancing is impossible at Mesa Verde and Yuba County Jail for those detained by ICE. And social distancing would not even have been a phrase known to those detained by ICE at Mesa Verde and Yuba if they didn't have televisions to watch or contact with the outside world. Multiple plaintiffs in our litigation have told us that they only even heard about social distancing from TV or from their lawyers or from their family members. It's neither discussed with them at the detention centers, and nor is it a realistic possibility. They sleep in bunk beds where they hit another bed if they sit up on the bottom bunk, or if they reach out their hands too far to the next bunk over. They line up like sardines in the cafeteria to get food, and then sit down at full tables. They wash their hands and go to the bathroom in crowded and unclean spaces where they're practically shoulder to shoulder with the person at the next sink, the next toilet, or the next shower stall. And they describe dirty toilets, unsanitary spaces, and inadequate supplies for sanitation and hygiene. Plaintiff Javier Alfaro, who's a father detained since January at Mesa Verde, describes a 100-person dorm that has been almost entirely full since he arrived. He was in dorm C with Charles Joseph, as he described it. And he said in this case, "Since I arrived in January, it has seemed that within hours of someone leaving, a new person comes in to take their place. This happened just last week. One person left and another person took his bunk within hours of the person leaving. We do not know if the people coming to our unit have been exposed to the coronavirus, but it makes us nervous." Plaintiff Lawrence Moira, who's detained at Yuba County Jail by ICE and with persistent lung problems from valley fever, sleeps within 2 feet of other detainees and has recreation on the roof, where, as he described, quote, "The metal toilets and sink are encrusted and stink of grime and human waste." Plaintiff Brenda Ruiz Tovar, who's won her immigration case twice, remains detained while the government appeals her decision a second time. She's had symptoms consistent with coronavirus after caring for another woman who was ill and at the detention center and taken away for medical treatment. While Ms. Ruiz Tovar was placed in a dirty cell for quarantine, she was never tested for COVID-19 and does not believe anyone at the detention center has. There's no evidence that anyone at either Mesa Verde or Yuba County Jail detained by ICE has been tested for COVID-19. Ms. Ruiz Tovar is now in a dorm where she can, quote, "reach out her hand and touch the bed to the side of her." She's the mother of a US citizen child whose parents and siblings are all US citizens or green card holders. And again, she's won her case twice. She's fighting for her release where she will not be exposed and where other people will not be at risk as well from her continued detention. In short, the reality for those detained at Mesa Verde and Yuba County Jail is the exact opposite of what we all now know is required to prevent the spread of COVID-19. The Centers for Disease Control and every doctor and epidemiologist can tell you, and some have told you today, that congregate living spaces, people cramped together and sharing meals and sleeping arrangements, are unsafe. Nursing home directors and cruise ship customers know this all too well now too. It's the reason that in this country, in the state, in our communities, we're taking unprecedented measures to limit the spread of coronavirus. And it's also the reason that some of those at Mesa Verde, as Charles Joseph poignantly described, participated in a hunger strike last week to protest the conditions there. They ultimately stopped the hunger strike because of threats and retaliation from the detention center authorities, who are going to be prevented from even buying their own food from the commissary. Plaintiff Javier Alfaro said, "We had no other option but to stop the protest, especially because we were worried about those who were older and sick and needed the food and were more at risk from the coronavirus. This is an unacceptable violation of their right to protest these abhorrent and unsafe conditions. And this lawsuit, in addition for calling for the release of those detained and at risk of exposure, illness, and death from coronavirus, defends the right of these individuals to protest these unsafe conditions. In response to complaints, ICE has responded that they're doing enough, but they've tested only a few hundred people. And in recently released figures, 1/3 of those tested have tested positive. The Guatemalan government recently suspended deportation flights after discovering that many people who were deported were positive. The CDC confirmed this. ICE is clearly not doing enough. The lack of testing does not equate to the lack of an outbreak. Civil immigration detainees are held in order to ensure that they attend their immigration court hearings. This detention should not compel them to risk their lives. We filed this litigation because it's critical that the courts intervene urgently and order releases to protect the safety of those detained as well as the general public. As Barbara Garcia just described, an outbreak at the detention center will not just affect those detained, it affects everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Emmy. Our next and final speaker is Angelica Salceda, staff attorney with the ACLU of Northern California, who will speak about why this lawsuit is such a critical tool in our efforts to save lives.
Thank you, Bree. This lawsuit builds on the ongoing efforts by many advocates and people in immigration detention that have been calling the attention to the abysmal conditions inside these facilities that simply don't allow anyone to engage in social distancing. And as many have said, really in a time when we're all being asked to remain 6 feet away from people, that we're reminded to constantly wash our hands, to sanitize, to wear face masks, to wear gloves, to seek medical attention if we're experiencing symptoms, people in immigration detention simply cannot do so under the current conditions. Given ICE's inability to respond appropriately to the pandemic, we are now asking the federal court to step in. And really the only way to adequately protect people in immigration detention against the spread of COVID-19 is to depopulate these facilities and start getting people released. As part of this case, we're asking the court to release enough class members to enable the necessary social distancing and to temporarily halt the introduction of new people into these facilities. This lawsuit is one of the first of its kind in the Northern District of California, and certainly would not be possible without our heroic clients who have continued to call for hygiene products, personal protective equipment, adequate medical attention, and release from immigration. This lawsuit is one more effort to call attention to those conditions and to see adequate changes for people in immigration detention. And we appreciate you all for joining us today, for participating, and we're really hopeful to see everyone come together, including folks who have been able to share their stories. So we appreciate you all.
Angelica. Thank you, Angelica, and a huge thanks to all of our speakers. A reminder to the press that we'll be sending out a list of speakers at the end of the conference, which will have everyone's name spelled out and the order of speakers. We've also now opened the chat feature to submit your questions into the chat box. With apologies because of the number of people on the call, we will not be able to take all questions, but we do have some time for questions. As a reminder, please submit your questions to Francisco Ugarte, include your name and outlet, and in just a couple of minutes, we'll get going with those. Thank you so much. So the first question that I see is from Timothy Redmond. Timothy, please do let us know your outlet. 48 Hills, thank you. A question for Angelica. How quickly can this get to the court for action?
Sorry, so I would also open it up to other of our team members too, if they want to answer this question. You know, it's really, once it's at the court for us, it's really, we're not, in terms of timeline, I mean, we're really urging and hoping that a court acknowledges the urgency of this case and is able to move it as quickly as possible. I think that at this point, that's really all we know at this point and can hope for.
You can hear me. The other point to note is that in addition to filing the complaint last night, we also filed a temporary restraining order identifying that this is an issue of great urgency and needs an immediate response.
Thank you. Question from, excuse me, we're getting them coming in. So we have a question from Meyer Gorlick of the San Francisco Examiner. Just a clarification, is the lawsuit asking for a release of all of the 400+ detainees? I'll answer this one and we'll pass the mic to my co-counsel for any additions. The lawsuit is asking for depopulation sufficient to make the facility safe and consistent with public health expertise. Right now, there is no ability to practice social distancing within either facility in all aspects of life. We're asking for release to make the facilities safe for those who remain inside. Another question asking for a response in Spanish. I'll pass the mic to Angelica for this one. What is the purpose of this legal action? In Spanish, please.
El propósito de esta demanda que entablamos ayer es para subrayar la importancia de asegurar que todas las personas que están en los centros de migración tienen acceso a poder distanciarse, a poder practicar propio higiene, como todos nosotros nos han pedido hacer, estamos haciendo en esta pandemia, y más que nada para alzar las voces de todas las personas que están en nuestro centro de detención, que están llamando la atención de las condiciones en las que ellos están en estos momentos, que realmente no es adecuado para esta pandemia.
Thank you, Angelica. I'll just let folks know that Dr. Nelson had to go back to his rounds, but if anyone has a question for him, please let Carolyn Goosen from the Public Defender's Office know, and she can follow up. And you'll be receiving her email address in the subsequent communication. A question we've received from Andres from Fox News. Would you describe there to be deliberate indifference? So our filings are all publicly available now, and I'd encourage you to look at them. As we describe in our papers, there are multiple reasons why the conditions of confinement in both of these facilities violate the constitutional rights of everyone detained there. These are civil detainees, and the law does not require that they prove deliberate indifference. However, we believe that under any constitutional standard that you apply here, the risk that our plaintiffs face is unconstitutional and incredibly, incredibly dangerous. Just checking in on the last couple of questions. Thank you all for your patience with this model. I think we just got a question about the recording of the press conference. I will actually let Carolyn or Valerie answer that one. And I think with that answer, we will be concluding today. So thank you everyone for participating. Thank you so much to Charles, to Guadalupe, to Barbara, and to Dr. Nelson. Valerie or Carolyn, please jump in on the recording, and then we're able to wrap up.
Thank you. We have been recording this. So as soon as we have our files ready and our coalition members have concurred, then we'll make it available. Currently, the press release is available on our San Francisco Public Defender website, which is sfpublicdefender.org, which has a lot of the information as well. I'm also going to post in the chat right now to everyone a list of everybody's names, the speakers, and I'll put that link as well to our press release. And I'll give you my contact information as well as Carolyn Goosen's contact information. Just a moment here.
Thank you, everyone. I think we can conclude unless there's anything else coming out. I see the last links are coming out now. So Valerie, I'll turn it over to you to conclude once everything's posted. Huge thanks, everyone, for joining us this morning.
Yes, thank you to everyone. We do hope that you reach out to us if you have follow-up questions. We'll be getting everything consolidated for you as soon as we can. And I want to thank everybody in the coalition for being part of the call, all the participants, everyone who joined us. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much. I think we're ready to end.
Thank you.